The summer of 1993 in the small town of Cedarville was marked by the carefree spirit of youth and the promise of endless adventures that seemed to stretch infinitely before the teenagers who called this quiet corner of rural Pennsylvania home. Among the many young people eager to make the most of their summer break were Emily Carter and Jason Miller, two inseparable best friends aged 16, who had grown up together in this close-knit community, where everyone knew everyone else's business and children could still roam freely without their parents' constant worry. Emily, with her striking fiery red hair that caught the sunlight like copper wire and sharp green eyes that sparkled with mischief and intelligence, was known throughout Cedarville for her adventurous spirit, quick wit, and fearless attitude toward life that sometimes worried her more conservative parents. Jason, tall and athletic with dark hair that he kept slightly longer than his father approved of, and a naturally calm demeanor that balanced Emily's more impulsive nature, was her loyal companion in every escapade, the steady anchor to her whirlwind energy, and the one person who could talk her out of her more dangerous ideas while still supporting her dreams of adventure. On the morning of July 15, 1993, a Thursday that dawned bright and clear with the promise of perfect weather for outdoor activities, the two friends set out on what was supposed to be a simple drive to Miller's Lake, a popular swimming spot located about 20 miles outside of town, where teenagers traditionally gathered during the summer months to swim, sunbathe, and enjoy their freedom from school responsibilities. Jason had recently gotten his driver's license and was eager to show off his driving skills and his pride and joy. A restored 1967 Ford Mustang in classic blue that had been passed down from his grandfather, who had lovingly maintained the car for decades before gifting it to his grandson on his 16th birthday. The Mustang, with its powerful V8 engine and pristine interior, was Jason's most treasured possession, and the envy of every teenager in Cedarville who dreamed of having their own classic car. Their families watched them leave around 10:30 a.m. with smiles and waves, Emily's mother reminding her to wear sunscreen, and Jason's father cautioning him to drive carefully and be home before dark for the family barbecue they had planned. The parents felt no particular worry as they watched the blue Mustang pull out of the driveway with its engine roaring proudly and windows rolled down, carrying their children toward what should have been nothing more than a typical summer day of teenage fun and freedom. But as the sun set that evening and the night deepened into darkness, neither Emily nor Jason returned home, and the distinctive blue Mustang was never seen again on the familiar streets of Cedarville. Where are you reading this story from? Share your city and country in the comments before we continue this story. 11 years would pass before a shocking discovery at a local junkyard would finally unravel the mystery, revealing a truth more chilling and complex than anyone in Cedarville could have imagined. The discovery that would finally solve the 11-year-old mystery of Emily Carter and Jason Miller's disappearance came on a sweltering August afternoon in 2004, when Tommy Rodriguez, a 28-year-old mechanic and part-time scrap metal dealer, was searching through the sprawling acres of Morrison's Auto Salvage Yard on the outskirts of Cedarville for usable parts to repair a customer's vintage car. Tommy had been working in the automotive industry since graduating high school and had developed an expert eye for valuable components hidden among the thousands of rusted, abandoned vehicles that filled the junkyard like a metallic graveyard of forgotten dreams and broken journeys. On this particular day, he was specifically looking for transmission parts for a 1960s Ford, when his attention was drawn to a section of the yard that had been largely untouched for years, where older vehicles were stacked in precarious towers and covered with layers of rust, vegetation, and the accumulated debris of more than a decade of neglect. As Tommy carefully navigated through the maze of twisted metal and broken glass, using a crowbar to move aside smaller pieces of scrap that blocked his path, he noticed something unusual about one particular stack of vehicles near the back corner of the property. Partially hidden beneath a collapsed pile of rusted car doors and engine blocks, he could make out the distinctive lines of what appeared to be a classic muscle car, its shape still recognizable despite years of exposure to the elements and the weight of debris that had accumulated on top of it. Intrigued by the possibility of finding valuable vintage parts, Tommy spent the better part of 2 hours carefully removing the debris and clearing away the overgrowth of weeds and small trees that had grown around and through the vehicle over the years. What he uncovered sent shockwaves through his system and would soon captivate the entire town of Cedarville. A 1967 Ford Mustang, in what had once been a brilliant blue color, now faded and rusted, but still unmistakably the same make and model that had disappeared with Emily and Jason 11 years earlier. The license plate, though corroded and partially obscured by rust, was still partially readable and matched the registration number that had been circulated in missing persons reports throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states. But what made Tommy's discovery truly horrifying was what he found inside the vehicle when he managed to pry open the driver's side door with his crowbar. The skeletal remains of 2 people were still seated in the front seats of the Mustang, preserved by the dry conditions inside the vehicle and the protective covering of debris that had shielded them from scavengers and the worst effects of weather over the years. Tommy immediately contacted the Cedarville Police Department, and within an hour, the junkyard was swarming with investigators, forensic specialists, and the county coroner, all working to carefully extract and examine what would prove to be the remains of Emily Carter and Jason Miller. The forensic examination revealed details that transformed what initially appeared to be a tragic accident into a complex criminal investigation that would shake the foundations of the small community. The positioning of the skeletal remains suggested that both teenagers had been in the front seats when they died, with Emily in the passenger seat and Jason behind the wheel. But the condition of their skulls told a much darker story. Both victims showed clear evidence of blunt force trauma. Multiple fractures that were inconsistent with injuries that would result from a car accident, but entirely consistent with deliberate, violent assault, using a heavy object like a tire iron or baseball bat. The investigation team, led by Detective Sarah Williams, who had been a rookie officer when Emily and Jason first disappeared, discovered that the Mustang had not simply been abandoned in the junkyard, but had been deliberately hidden beneath layers of scrap metal and automotive debris. The systematic way the car had been concealed suggested that whoever was responsible had intimate knowledge of the junkyard's layout and operations, and had taken considerable time and effort to ensure the vehicle would remain undiscovered. Soil samples taken from around the car revealed that it had been placed in its location shortly after the teenagers' disappearance in 1993, meaning their bodies had been lying undiscovered just miles from their homes for over a decade, while their families desperately searched for answers and held on to hope that they might still be alive. Further examination of the crime scene revealed additional evidence that painted a chilling picture of the teenagers' final moments. Personal belongings found in the car included Emily's distinctive silver bracelet that her grandmother had given her for her 16th birthday, Jason's wallet with his brand-new driver's license still inside, and a cooler in the back seat that still contained the remnants of the lunch they had packed for their trip to Miller's Lake. Most disturbing of all, investigators found that the car's radio had been tuned to a local rock station that Emily and Jason were known to listen to, and a cassette tape of their favorite band was still in the player, frozen in time as a haunting reminder of the normal teenage day that had ended in such violence. The discovery sent shockwaves through Cedarville, where many residents had never stopped hoping that Emily and Jason would someday return home, and it launched an intensive investigation into who could have committed such a heinous crime and successfully hidden it for 11 years. The investigation into the murders of Emily Carter and Jason Miller quickly focused on the ownership and operational history of Morrison's Auto Salvage Yard, where their bodies had been discovered after 11 years of concealment. Detective Williams and her team discovered that the junkyard had been owned by Frank Morrison, a gruff 67-year-old man who had operated the business since the 1970s and was well known in Cedarville for his reclusive nature and volatile temper. Morrison had a history of conflicts with local teenagers who sometimes trespassed on his property looking for car parts or using the secluded location for parties, and several residents recalled incidents where he had chased young people away with threats and aggressive behavior. However, when investigators attempted to interview Morrison about the discovery, they learned that he had died of a heart attack in 1999, taking any knowledge he might have had about the crime to his grave and leaving behind only his nephew, Danny Morrison, who had inherited the junkyard and continued its operations. Danny Morrison, a 42-year-old man with a criminal record that included assault charges and drug-related offenses, initially denied any knowledge of how the Mustang had ended up buried in his uncle's junkyard. He claimed that he had been working in construction in another state during the summer of 1993 and had only returned to Cedarville after his uncle's death to take over the family business. However, as investigators dug deeper into Danny's background and timeline, they discovered inconsistencies in his story that raised serious suspicions about his involvement in the crime. Phone records from 1993 showed that Danny had been in contact with his uncle during the period when Emily and Jason disappeared, and several witnesses came forward to report that they had seen Danny in Cedarville during that summer, contradicting his claims about being out of state. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators discovered that Danny Morrison had been arrested for assault just 3 weeks after Emily and Jason's disappearance, following an incident at a local bar where he had attacked another patron with a pool cue during an argument about a girl. The victim of that assault, now living in another state, contacted police after seeing news coverage of the junkyard discovery and revealed that Danny had been drinking heavily that night and had made disturbing comments about teaching some smart-mouthed kids a lesson and making sure nobody would find them. This witness testimony, combined with forensic evidence found at the crime scene, began to paint a picture of what had likely happened on that fateful July day in 1993. Investigators theorized that Emily and Jason had encountered Danny Morrison somewhere between Cedarville and Miller's Lake, possibly when their car broke down or when they stopped to help someone they thought was in distress, and that the encounter had escalated into violence that cost both teenagers their lives. The case against Danny Morrison strengthened significantly when forensic experts made a crucial discovery while examining the interior of the buried Mustang with advanced DNA analysis techniques that had not been available during the original investigation in 1993. Microscopic blood samples found on the car's steering wheel and dashboard were tested and revealed DNA profiles that matched both Emily and Jason. But more importantly, they also contained traces of DNA from a third individual who was not one of the victims. When this unknown DNA profile was run through the National Criminal Database, it returned a match to Danny Morrison, whose genetic information had been collected during his various arrests over the years. This physical evidence placed Morrison inside the victim's car, directly contradicting his claims of having no knowledge about their disappearance and providing investigators with the smoking gun they needed to build a solid case against him. Further investigation revealed the likely sequence of events that had led to the teenagers' deaths. According to the reconstruction developed by Detective Williams and her team, Emily and Jason had been driving toward Miller's Lake on the morning of July 15th when they encountered Danny Morrison on a remote stretch of rural road. Morrison, who had been drinking and was in an agitated state due to personal problems and financial difficulties, had apparently flagged down the teenagers under the pretense of needing help with his own vehicle. What started as a seemingly innocent roadside encounter quickly turned violent when Morrison, possibly triggered by something the teenagers said or did, flew into a rage and attacked them with a tire iron that he kept in his truck. The forensic evidence suggested that both Emily and Jason had been killed at the roadside location, after which Morrison had driven their Mustang to his uncle's junkyard and carefully concealed it beneath layers of scrap metal and debris. The psychological profile developed by criminal experts painted Morrison as a man with severe anger management issues and a history of violence against younger people, particularly those he perceived as privileged or disrespectful. Several former acquaintances came forward to describe incidents where Morrison had expressed resentment toward local teenagers, whom he viewed as spoiled and entitled. His decision to hide the bodies rather than report the incident as an accident or act of self-defense suggested a level of premeditation and criminal sophistication that indicated he knew exactly what he was doing and understood the gravity of his actions. The fact that he had successfully concealed the crime for 11 years while continuing to live and work in the same community demonstrated a callousness that shocked even experienced investigators. The arrest of Danny Morrison in September 2004 brought a mixture of relief and renewed grief to the families of Emily Carter and Jason Miller, who had spent over a decade hoping for answers while fearing the worst about their children's fate. The trial of Danny Morrison began in March 2005 and became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in the history of Cedarville, drawing media attention from across Pennsylvania and neighboring states as the community finally confronted the truth about what had happened to two of their beloved young people. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Margaret Thompson, presented a compelling case that combined forensic evidence, witness testimony, and Morrison's own contradictory statements to paint a clear picture of premeditated murder followed by an elaborate cover-up. The DNA evidence found in the Mustang was particularly damaging to Morrison's defense, as it definitively placed him at the scene of the crime and contradicted his repeated denials of any involvement in the teenager's disappearance. Expert witnesses testified about the nature of the injuries sustained by Emily and Jason, explaining to the jury that the pattern of skull fractures was consistent with multiple blows from a heavy, blunt instrument and could not have resulted from any type of accident or self-defense scenario. The most emotional moments of the trial came when family members of the victims took the stand to describe the 11 years of anguish, uncertainty, and false hope they had endured while searching for their children. Emily's mother, Margaret Carter, broke down in tears as she described the countless nights she had stayed awake waiting for a phone call that never came, and the way she had kept Emily's room exactly as her daughter had left it, hoping against hope that she would someday return home. Jason's father, Robert Miller, spoke about the guilt he felt for allowing his son to drive the Mustang that day, and how he had spent years wondering if he could have somehow prevented the tragedy by being more protective or setting stricter rules. Their testimony highlighted not only the devastating impact of the crime on the immediate families, but also the way the unsolved disappearance had haunted the entire community for over a decade. Morrison's defense team, led by attorney James Crawford, attempted to argue that the DNA evidence could have been transferred innocently and that their client was being railroaded by investigators desperate to solve a high-profile cold case. They portrayed Morrison as a troubled but essentially harmless man who had been struggling with alcoholism and personal problems, and suggested that he was being scapegoated because of his criminal history and outsider status in the community. However, their arguments were severely undermined when Morrison himself took the stand and became increasingly agitated under cross-examination, eventually losing his temper and making threatening gestures toward the prosecutor that had to be restrained by court security. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, and Morrison was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, finally bringing legal closure to a case that had tormented Cedarville for more than a decade. The years following Morrison's conviction brought both healing and lasting change to the community of Cedarville, as residents worked to process the trauma of learning that a brutal killer had lived among them for years, while the families of his victims suffered in ignorance. The discovery that Emily and Jason had been murdered by someone from their own community, rather than falling victim to a random accident or crime committed by strangers, forced many residents to confront uncomfortable questions about how well they really knew their neighbors and whether there were other dangerous individuals hiding in plain sight. The case prompted significant changes in local law enforcement procedures, including the establishment of more rigorous protocols for investigating missing persons cases and the implementation of advanced forensic techniques that might have solved the case years earlier if they had been available in 1993. Detective Sarah Williams, who had been promoted to chief of police following her successful handling of the investigation, became a vocal advocate for cold case units and improved training for officers dealing with disappearances. The families of Emily Carter and Jason Miller found different ways to honor their children's memory and channel their grief into positive action that could help prevent similar tragedies. The Carter family established a scholarship fund for local high school students pursuing careers in law enforcement or forensic science, inspired by their hope that better-trained investigators might be able to solve future cases more quickly and spare other families the years of uncertainty they had endured. The Miller family focused their efforts on improving safety education for teenagers, working with local schools to develop programs that taught young people about the importance of staying in contact with family members during outings and being cautious when encountering strangers who might need help. These educational initiatives emphasized that while it was important to maintain the trusting, helpful nature that characterized small-town communities, young people needed to be aware of potential dangers and take basic precautions to protect themselves. The Morrison Auto Salvage Yard was permanently closed following Danny Morrison's conviction, and the property was eventually purchased by the town of Cedarville and converted into a memorial park dedicated to Emily and Jason. The park featured walking trails, a small pond, and a memorial garden where visitors could reflect on the lives of the two teenagers and the importance of community safety. A bronze plaque near the entrance bore their photographs and an inscription that read, "In memory of Emily Carter and Jason Miller, whose bright spirits and loving hearts will never be forgotten, and whose legacy reminds us to cherish each day and protect those we love." The transformation of the site from a place of horror and concealment into a peaceful space for remembrance and reflection became a powerful symbol of the community's resilience and determination to find meaning in tragedy. The case also had broader implications for law enforcement agencies across Pennsylvania and beyond, as it demonstrated the importance of preserving crime scenes and evidence even in cases that initially appeared to be simple disappearances or accidents. The impact of the Carter-Miller case extended far beyond the borders of Cedarville, influencing law enforcement practices and missing persons investigations throughout Pennsylvania and across the United States. The case became a cornerstone study in police academies and forensic training programs, demonstrating how advances in DNA analysis and forensic technology could breathe new life into cold cases that had seemed unsolvable for years. The Pennsylvania State Police established the Emily and Jason Protocol, a comprehensive set of guidelines for investigating missing persons cases that emphasized the importance of thoroughly searching all potential disposal sites within a 50-mile radius of the victim's last known location, including junkyards, abandoned properties, and industrial sites where bodies or vehicles might be concealed. This protocol also mandated the preservation of all physical evidence from missing persons cases for at least 25 years, recognizing that future technological advances might make it possible to solve cases that were beyond the reach of current investigative methods. The psychological impact on the Cedarville community continued to reverberate years after Morrison's conviction, as residents struggled to come to terms with the fact that they had unknowingly lived alongside a killer for over a decade. Many longtime residents reported feeling a sense of betrayal and loss of innocence, realizing that their small town was not immune to the kind of random violence they had always associated with larger cities. Support groups were established to help community members process their feelings of vulnerability and fear, and local churches organized counseling sessions for those who were struggling to cope with the revelation that evil had been hiding in their midst. The case also sparked important conversations about mental health awareness and the warning signs of violent behavior, as residents reflected on whether there had been red flags about Morrison's dangerous tendencies that they had missed or ignored. Tommy Rodriguez, the mechanic whose discovery had finally brought the truth to light, became something of a reluctant local hero, though he struggled with the psychological burden of having found the bodies of two young people who had been missing for so long. He established a small foundation that provided financial assistance to families of missing persons, using his own experience to understand the unique challenges faced by those who were searching for lost loved ones. His discovery also led to systematic searches of other abandoned junkyards and industrial sites throughout the region, resulting in the resolution of several additional cold cases and the recovery of remains that had been missing for years. The legacy of Emily Carter and Jason Miller lived on through the countless lives that were saved by the improved investigative techniques and safety protocols that emerged from their tragic case, proving that even the most senseless crimes could ultimately serve a greater purpose in protecting future generations. The technological innovations that emerged from the Carter-Miller investigation revolutionized cold case investigations across the country, as law enforcement agencies recognized the potential of advanced forensic techniques to solve decades-old mysteries. The success of DNA analysis in identifying Morrison as the killer led to increased funding for forensic laboratories and the development of more sophisticated genetic testing methods that could extract usable DNA profiles from increasingly degraded samples. Universities began offering specialized degree programs in forensic archaeology and crime scene reconstruction, training a new generation of investigators who understood how to systematically search large areas like junkyards and industrial sites for hidden evidence. The case also sparked innovations in ground-penetrating radar technology and cadaver dog training programs, as investigators realized the need for better tools to locate concealed remains in complex environments filled with metal debris and chemical contamination. By 2010, 15 years after Morrison's conviction, the investigative techniques pioneered during the Carter-Miller case had been used to solve more than 200 cold cases across North America, bringing closure to families who had waited decades for answers about their missing loved ones. The Cedarville method, as it became known in law enforcement circles, emphasized the importance of treating every missing persons case as a potential homicide from the very beginning, preserving evidence with the same care and attention that would be given to an active murder investigation. This approach required significant changes in police department budgets and training programs, but the results spoke for themselves as clearance rates for missing persons cases improved dramatically in jurisdictions that adopted the new protocols. The annual Emily and Jason Memorial Conference, established in 2007, became the premier gathering for missing persons investigators, forensic specialists, and victim advocacy groups from around the world. Held each summer in Cedarville, the conference brought together hundreds of professionals who shared the latest techniques and technologies for finding missing persons and solving cold cases. The event also provided a forum for families of missing persons to connect with each other and with the investigators working on their cases, creating a supportive community that understood the unique challenges of living with uncertainty and hope in equal measure. The ripple effects of Emily and Jason's story continued to spread as their case was featured in documentaries, true crime podcasts, and academic studies that examined how a small-town tragedy had catalyzed nationwide improvements in investigative practices and victim support services. Today, more than 3 decades after Emily Carter and Jason Miller set out for what should have been a carefree summer day at Miller's Lake, their legacy continues to protect countless individuals through the investigative innovations, safety protocols, and community awareness programs that emerged from their tragic story. The memorial park that now stands where Morrison's auto salvage yard once concealed their bodies has become a place of pilgrimage for families of missing persons from across the country, who come to find solace and inspiration in the knowledge that even the most carefully hidden crimes can eventually be brought to light through persistence, advanced technology, and the dedication of investigators who refuse to give up. The bronze memorial plaque bearing Emily and Jason's smiling faces, now weathered by years of Pennsylvania seasons but still clearly visible to visitors, serves as a powerful reminder that behind every cold case statistic are real people with families who love them and communities that will never forget them. The investigative techniques developed during their case have evolved with advancing technology, incorporating artificial intelligence, satellite imagery analysis, and sophisticated database systems that can cross-reference missing persons cases with geographical and temporal patterns. that might reveal the work of serial offenders. Danny Morrison, now in his 60s, and serving his life sentence at the State Correctional Institution in Pennsylvania, has never expressed remorse for his crimes or provided information about other potential victims. But investigators continue to examine unsolved cases from the 1990s for possible connections to his known activities. The Emily and Jason Foundation, established by their families and now operating in 12 states, has funded the training of over 500 specialized investigators and contributed to the resolution of more than 400 missing persons cases, transforming the grief of two families into a force for justice that spans generations. The blue 1967 Ford Mustang that Jason had been so proud to drive has been carefully restored by volunteers and is now permanently displayed in the Cedarville Police Department as a memorial to the victims and a training tool for new investigators. Each year on July 15th, the anniversary of their disappearance, the entire community gathers at the Memorial Park for a ceremony that honors Emily and Jason's memory, while celebrating the progress that has been made in protecting others from similar fates. Their story has become more than a tale of tragedy. It has become a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of never giving up hope, and the way that love and determination can transform even the darkest chapters of human experience into beacons of light that guide others towards safety and justice.